Holy shit. He said what?
Oh, I was there, hated the day. The day was a miserable day. I mean, it was a worst royal engagement I ever did, a royal wedding I ever did. And I travelled the world with him, and I did really enjoy working with him. But, you know, now I really don't care if I ever see him again, because the way he's behaved towards the king and our queen and his brother and his sister-in-law is appalling.
Forget everything you saw in the fairy tale version on TV, because Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's royal wedding wasn't just a simple celebration. It was more like a massive staged spectacle built for flashing cameras, global headlines, and non-stop attention-grabbing energy. The glossy carriages rolling in, the dramatic music echoing through Windsor, and the celebrity-filled guest shots weren't just natural moments. They felt carefully arranged, like every second had a script behind it. She moved through it all with a polished presence, almost like an actress stepping into a perfectly rehearsed scene, and the whole thing felt so loud and dramatic that it hit the audience like an opera, exploding with reactions like wow and disbelief everywhere. Behind the scenes, according to royal photographer Arthur Edwards, things were far from smooth and calm. They were reportedly chaotic, tense, and uncomfortable in ways the public never really saw. Guests were sweating under intense heat, squeezed into heavy formal outfits, coats and gowns that felt more like traps than fashion, struggling just to stay composed without fainting or breaking down under the pressure of it all. Even senior royals, people who had spent decades serving the monarchy with loyalty and discipline, were allegedly pushed into the back rows like they suddenly didn't matter anymore, which made the whole seating situation feel cold and disrespectful. Meanwhile, Hollywood personalities and Meghan's industry connections were reportedly placed right in the prime seats, like the event had turned into a private entertainment showcase just for them. It looked less like a royal gathering.
She delivered it like an actress delivered it, and Oprah responded going, wow. All my life, you know, and then Oprah Winfrey had met them once. She was a guest. The Clooneys, the guests. I mean, never met them before, but they were the guests. And, you know, I thought to myself, this all showbiz rubbish. So he was angry, and I felt we were punished for that. In fact, I never got one picture in the paper published from that day.
And more like a personal runway moment where fame and modern celebrity status seemed to take priority over long-standing royal tradition and family hierarchy. Even the press, which normally thrives on capturing every royal moment, was caught in a strange situation because the energy shifted completely. Prince Harry reportedly refused to engage with cameras, avoiding direct shots and ducking away from angles in a way that left photographers scrambling and confused, trying to capture usable images in real-time chaos. Arthur Edwards even admitted he struggled to get a single proper photo, calling it one of the most difficult royal events he had ever worked on, which made this wedding stand out for all the wrong reasons. And Meghan, according to critics and observers, seemed to treat the entire event less like a merging of two families and more like a high-profile launch of her personal brand identity. Forget simple romance or traditional unity. This moment felt like a carefully staged debut, a glamorous rollout designed for maximum public attention and media impact. What looked like a dreamy fairy tale from the outside was, according to those accounts, a tightly controlled illusion that didn't feel as warm behind the scenes as it appeared on the television. The wedding broadcast itself looked polished to perfection, with waving flags, powerful choir performances, and celebrities glowing under the spotlight like everything was flawless and magical. Millions of viewers believed they were watching a modern royal love story unfold in real time, say.
Oh, I was there, hated the day. The day was a miserable day. I mean, it was a worst royal engagement I ever did, a royal wedding I ever did. When I think done some really lovely royal weddings. I did both King Charles's weddings. I did William's wedding. I did Andrew's wedding. I did Sophie and Edward. You know, I mean, they were lovely occasions. But that today, I couldn't get out of Windsor quick enough. I promise you that.
The worst royal wedding to cover.
Yeah.
But those inside the venue allegedly experienced something completely different and far less magical. Instead of romance, there was discomfort, exhaustion, and a suffocating atmosphere that made the entire experience feel heavy and draining. Guests were packed tightly inside Windsor under intense heat, sitting for hours while sweat reportedly ran down their formal clothing, making even expensive designer outfits feel unbearable and uncomfortable. Women clutched fans desperately like lifelines, makeup smudging, tempers rising and patience wearing thin as the long ceremony dragged on. This wasn't the elegant royal experience people expected. It felt more like endurance under pressure. Arthur Edwards himself described the experience as one of the worst royal assignments he had ever covered, and which says a lot considering his decades of experience working on major royal events. He had covered weddings involving Charles, Diana, William, and Kate, yet he reportedly said nothing compared to the discomfort and chaos of this one, which shocked many who expected a flawless royal production. The issue wasn't just the weather, even though it was hot. It was the feeling that guest comfort wasn't a priority at all. Royal weddings had survived rain, storms, and heat before, but this situation felt different because the planning seemed to ignore how people would actually endure the long hours inside. Cameras captured smiles and perfect angles, but behind those frames, exhaustion and frustration were building up heavily. What was promoted globally as a day of joy.
I felt so. I felt that wasn't just me, it was the whole of the British press. You know, they were in many ways badly treated. I think it was, Harry was angry with us really because some of the things that have been said about Meghan, and quite rightly, some of the things that were said about Meghan during the engagement were pretty hard. I mean, obviously when William was born and Harry was born and George and Charlotte and Louis, we got great pictures outside the hospital. I remember, and William and Catherine especially, they made such an effort to show the whole world their new baby.
Allegedly felt more like a slow boiling endurance test for those actually inside the venue. For viewers at home, it looked like pure celebration. But for guests, it reportedly felt far more overwhelming and draining than expected. If the heat wasn't enough, the seating arrangement reportedly created another layer of tension and embarrassment. People who had served the monarchy for decades, military veterans, senior royal affiliates, and long-time family supporters were allegedly placed far away from the main spotlight, pushed into less visible rows like background figures in their own historical moment. Meanwhile, Hollywood celebrities and newer acquaintances were positioned in prime viewing areas, making the whole setup feel more like a celebrity showcase than a traditional royal wedding rooted in hierarchy and history. Arthur Edwards even joked that he needed help just figuring out where he was seated, showing how confusing the arrangement had become even for experienced professionals. His view was reportedly blocked, making his job difficult and frustrating despite his long career covering royal events. Some guests allegedly whispered among themselves, questioning whether the event felt more like a red carpet-style gathering than a formal royal ceremony. The atmosphere inside Windsor reportedly shifted into something closer to a Hollywood awards night, just inside a royal setting, which confused many traditional observers.
I have to say, though, you know, that first year of Meghan, working with her on the road, you know, we went all over the country. She was incredible. I mean, I thought she was a great asset to the family. I know they'd be seething. I knew
the message, according to critics, felt clear in that moment. Status and fame seemed to outweigh tradition and loyalty, and that shift didn't sit well with everyone watching closely. If guests thought the reception would improve the experience, they were reportedly disappointed again because the tone stayed minimal and unconventional. Instead of grand royal dining, the reception leaned toward a lighter setup that surprised many attendees. Food was described by observers as small bites and simple servings, rather than large royal banquet spreads, leaving guests in expensive formal wear lightly nibbling instead of enjoying a full meal experience. Some reportedly found it surprising that such a high-profile event didn't feature the traditional royal abundance they expected. People whispered about it quietly, some laughing in disbelief, while others felt genuinely frustrated by how minimal everything felt compared to past royal weddings. Arthur Edwards even described the portions as unusually small, emphasizing how different this event felt from royal traditions built on grandeur. For many, it created the impression that presentation mattered more than substance, and that feeling stuck with them long after the event ended. Instead of feeling like a grand royal celebration, critics argued it felt more like a carefully controlled public relations showcase designed for modern media consumption rather than traditional royal ceremony. And amid all this, Prince Harry's behavior towards the press added even more tension to the atmosphere. Instead of openly engaging with photographers as expected in royal tradition, he reportedly avoided cameras, shifted positions, and blocked angles in ways that made capturing moments extremely difficult. For photographers like Arthur Edwards, it turned the job into a challenge, with every attempt to get a clean shot being interrupted by movement, avoidance, or blocked views. It felt less like working with a future king and more like trying to capture moments from someone actively resisting the process. This unusual interaction with the press added another layer to an already intense and highly debated royal event that left both guests and media with mixed and heated impressions. Arthur Edwards, the veteran photographer who has spent decades capturing some of the most iconic royal moments involving King Charles, Princess Diana, Prince William, and Catherine, Princess of Wales, reportedly admitted something shocking about this wedding experience. He described it as the first royal wedding where he struggled to produce even a single truly usable, respectful image that matched the standards of royal history. For someone who has worked through countless global events and royal milestones, this moment stood out in a way that felt unusually tense and difficult, like everything was slipping out of control behind the camera lenses. According to accounts shared by critics and observers, this wasn't seen as a random technical issue or coincidence. It was interpreted by some as a deliberate tension between the couple and sections of the British media. Prince Harry in particular was described as being deeply frustrated with how Meghan Markle was treated by the press in earlier years, and some claims suggested that the wedding atmosphere reflected that frustration in subtle but visible ways. Instead of the usual open cooperation between royals and photographers, there was reportedly distance, avoidance, and a heavy emotional weight hanging in the air that made capturing clean royal moments extremely difficult. What should have been a globally celebrated union filled with unity and tradition instead became, according to critics, a space filled with emotional tension and unresolved conflict. The idea of a joyful royal celebration was overshadowed by a growing sense that personal grievances and historical frustrations were bleeding into a public royal moment that millions were watching live around the world. The contrast between expectation and reality made the entire experience feel unusually sharp and divided. Royal weddings have always been built on centuries of tradition, symbolism, and carefully preserved rituals meant to represent stability and continuity within the monarchy. These ceremonies are designed to reinforce unity, respect, and the long-standing heritage of the royal institution, connecting generations through shared customs and symbolic gestures. But in this case, observers claimed that many of those traditional elements felt reinterpreted or adjusted in ways that made the event feel more modern, more theatrical, and more aligned with global entertainment culture than strict royal formality. From the tone of certain speeches to the overall presentation style, some critics described moments that felt more like a staged performance than a deeply traditional royal ceremony. The sermon, for example, was interpreted by some viewers as emotionally expressive and modern in delivery, almost like a powerful spoken performance designed for global broadcast rather than a strictly traditional royal religious address. This shift in tone became a major talking point for those who closely follow royal protocol and ceremonial structure. Arthur Edwards reportedly noticed this shift immediately during the event, describing the overall atmosphere as something carefully curated for global media consumption rather than rooted in long-established royal continuity. Rituals that once symbolized loyalty, duty, and institutional unity were, according to some interpretations, simplified or adjusted in ways that made them feel more accessible to modern audiences but less traditional in tone. For many guests and royal observers, this created a deep emotional contrast. On one side, there was admiration for the modern, global, and inclusive energy of the event. But on the other side, there was a sense of loss for the strict ceremonial structure that defined earlier royal weddings like those of Charles and Diana or William and Catherine. That emotional tension became part of the larger conversation surrounding the day. Some observers even interpreted the wedding as a symbolic turning point, where tradition and modern independence appeared to collide in a very public and highly visible way. Instead of reinforcing a shared royal identity, critics claimed it highlighted differences in perspective, lifestyle, and public approach within the family itself. That interpretation turned the event into something far bigger than a wedding. It became a moment of cultural and institutional debate. After the ceremony and celebrations, the narrative reportedly shifted again as discussions emerged about distance between the couple and certain royal traditions. According to commentary from critics, Meghan and Harry began making choices that emphasized privacy, independence, and control over their public environment. Invitations to stay at royal residences were reportedly declined in favor of private arrangements, which some interpreted as a desire for greater autonomy and separation from traditional royal routines. Over time, reports and public discussions suggested that family gatherings became less frequent and opportunities for extended royal interaction reportedly became more limited. This created emotional reactions among observers who viewed the monarchy as deeply rooted in family connection and generational unity. The idea of younger royals growing up with limited interaction with extended family members became a major point of public debate. Arthur Edwards himself reportedly described this situation as heartbreaking from a symbolic perspective, emphasizing how royal traditions often revolve around continuity, shared experiences, and generational bonds. For him and others who have followed the monarchy for decades, the idea of distance between royal children and their wider family network felt emotionally significant and culturally impactful. Critics of the situation also pointed out what they perceived as a contradiction between public messaging and private choices. On one hand, messages about family importance, compassion, and emotional well-being were widely discussed in public appearances. On the other hand, some observers argued that the reality of reduced family interaction created a tension between narrative and perception. This contrast became a recurring theme in media discussions surrounding the couple. As public conversation continued, attention eventually shifted toward the now famous Oprah interview, which many described as a major turning point in how the story of Meghan and Harry was presented to the world. According to critics, the interview was not just a casual conversation, but a highly structured and emotionally intense media moment designed to share their perspective on their experiences within the royal institution. Meghan and Harry, during the interview, spoke about their personal struggles, emotional challenges, and difficult moments within royal life, which immediately sparked global discussion. Supporters viewed it as a powerful moment of honesty and vulnerability, while critics interpreted it as a strategic media move with strong narrative framing that positioned them as central voices in a larger institutional conflict. Arthur Edwards and other media commentators described the timing of the interview as significant, suggesting it arrived at a moment when public attention was already shifting and visibility was crucial. The interview dominated headlines for weeks, fueling debates across news platforms, social media, and public forums around the world. For millions of viewers, the interview felt like an emotional revelation filled with personal storytelling and intense moments. But for critics, it was framed as a carefully edited and structured media production designed to maximize global attention and sustain public interest in the ongoing royal narrative. The impact of the interview extended far beyond television screens. It reportedly deepened divisions, intensified debates, and created long-lasting discussions about transparency, privacy, and institutional accountability within royal life. It became part of a much larger story that continued evolving in the public eye. Looking back, critics often connect the wedding, the interviews, and the media appearances as part of a continuous timeline of public narrative building and global attention management. From glamorous royal ceremony to high-profile media storytelling, each stage contributed to a larger conversation about identity, tradition, and modern celebrity culture intersecting with monarchy. According to this perspective, the wedding wasn't just a celebration, it became the starting point of a much longer public journey filled with transformation, controversy, and constant media focus. Every moment afterward was viewed through the lens of that initial global spectacle. Supporters, however, see it differently, interpreting the entire sequence as a story of independence, personal growth, and breaking away from rigid expectations. This contrast in interpretation is exactly what keeps the discussion alive and constantly evolving across audiences worldwide. In the end, the legacy of the wedding and everything that followed continues to be debated, analyzed, and reinterpreted from multiple angles. It remains one of the most talked about royal events in modern history, not just for its beauty and grandeur, but for the conversations it sparked about tradition, media, and personal freedom. And if you're still here watching this breakdown unfold, make sure to drop a comment and share what you think about all of this, because this story clearly doesn't end here. And don't forget to subscribe, stay tuned, and keep watching for the next deep dive, because there's always more behind the headlines than what first meets the eye.